Hello and welcome. You're watching the RPG Club, where we look at tips and tricks for running campaigns and clubs for your local schools and communities. Today I want to begin by talking about starting this club or campaign and kind of where to begin as a dungeon master when you're working with youth in community or high school or middle school clubs. When you're dealing with the youth, they're used to coming into these campaigns from things like board games or video games where they've had a very visually immersive experience. So my experience with working with them has been when you're trying to create a Dungeon and Dragon or other RPG campaign and you're doing it theater of the mind, meaning that you're just there describing the scenes and the stories. It's very difficult for the youth to engage in, especially when you get to things like exploration or combat. There's so many moving parts to it that it can be very confusing to the participants and make it really hard for them to really dive in. You spend a lot of time just retelling everything so they get the details there. Also, if you're just trying to do something simple like doodling on a battle mat in the old school way, it doesn't really connect with our youth today. They're used to that really visually engaging experience. And so what I wanted to do as I created my first campaign was look at how can I create a visually engaging experience for my youth, but do it inexpensively and quickly. That's where I want to introduce you to a product that one of my students actually got me on. That's brand new. It just came out in 2019, shipped out in 2020, called Dungeon Craft. Dungeon Craft is a 2D paper dungeon mat made for Dungeons & Dragons and other RPG campaigns. When I first went down the road of trying to create this immersive visual experience, my first thought was to go to something like a 3D printed model. And, you know, you'll find as you watch more of my videos, I'm a huge fan of 3D printed models. There's just nothing else that compares to create that immersive experience. When your characters walk up to this tavern, you don't have to take a lot of time describing it. The players can see it, they can understand it, they can, you know, imagine themselves there. And as they walk into the tavern itself, you can open it up and walk them into the tavern, and they can see the bartender at the bar. They can see the other characters around the room and decide for themselves how they want to react to the situation. And I wanted to create an experience like that. But the truth is, 3D printed models are horrendously time-consuming, and they can be expensive. And so that just wasn't an option as I started out with this high school club on a budget of basically zero. So I feel like the Dungeon Craft system creates that happy medium where it's still affordable, yet can create that same experience. I can still lay out a tavern or a shop, and as the players come into the building, the cool thing about Dungeon Craft is it is two-sided. And so you can simply flip over the tile and see the inside of the building. And so this example here is a armory. So it's an easy shop. You can throw a whole row of shops out instantly and have a whole street that they can wander in and out of and go shopping if that's what they want to do. And so it still creates that immersive experience where they can jump in and out of different rooms and buildings and see the items in and around them that they can interact with, but do it from a 2D experience that cuts down on the price horrendously. So there are several different Dungeon Craft systems out there right now. The first one, called Volume 1, I call it the core set, basically has 3 different areas that it focuses on. The first area is the town, like the armory you saw there. So quickly you can create and throw out a whole bunch of different buildings that you can make a little town out of, and then everything's two-sided so they can jump in and out of the different buildings and interact that way. But you can create immersive marketplaces and streets and cityscapes in just a matter of seconds as you throw out these different 2D tiles. The other section of the core set is the dungeons. And so it has different rooms and hallways and doors and traps and monsters and statues and experiences there that are all kind of unique to that dungeon space. The last one is the wilderness. So like this scene here, you can set up rivers and cliffs and waterfalls, trees, and different camps. So when they're wandering through the wilderness between different areas, or if they're, camping for the night, you can create an environment where they can interact with whatever comes to attack them in the night. So that's kind of cool too. A couple of things that I really like about the Dungeon Craft setup and the experience from them is, first of all, that all of the tiles are two-sided. So you saw with the tavern that I could create that two-sided experience, but all of the tiles have that. So, for example, the trees are two-sided. You can get summer or fall, or if it's a pine tree, you can get summer or winter. Then you have the buildings. You have even these, like this horse. If I flip it over, it's got a skeletal horse, which is super handy when you're doing Acquisitions Incorporated. Little spoiler there. Even the beds, you've got a made bed on one side, a rumpled bed on the other. It creates that variety that adds to the visual immersiveness of the experience that you're getting. So I really like that. You also have a bunch of character tiles. That's another thing that I really like about the Dungeon Craft system. So if you can't afford a bunch of 3D miniatures to start out with, you can do a bunch of these 2D miniature tiles, and both of them are two-sided, or all of them are two-sided as well. You get different styles for the different characters. They've got player characters and monsters. The variety isn't great, so I'm still recommending moving to 3D miniatures eventually, but this is a good place to start. And then another thing that I really like about the Dungeon Craft tiles themselves is you can kind of see here in the light kind of the glare that comes off of them. They are laminated plastic. They are both dry erase and wet erase compatible. So if you have a character that has some kind of a condition, like maybe they're frightened or maybe they're sleeping, you can draw that right onto the character itself and then just wipe it off when you're finished with it. So I really love that experience of the Dungeon Craft tiles from 1985 games. So if you're interested in picking up the Dungeon Craft, the cool thing is this core set has over 1,000 different tiles to them, and it is $30 on their website. So that's a pretty affordable entry into the foray of Dungeons & Dragons and other RPG games. So you can get them on their website. I'll put a link to that down below. So what are the only real downsides that I can see to the dungeon tiles themselves is how they arrive. Dungeon Craft arrives in 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, like I'm showing you here. And everything has to be cut out by hand by you. So that is one of the downsides. I don't see it's really a big downside, especially for the cost. I'm more than happy to cut these out, but don't expect to just order it today, have it arrive tomorrow, and be ready to start DMing your first campaign the next day. This took me several weeks to cut them all out. And, you got to plan for that. So plan a few weeks to cut these out. You can have your students help you if you want, but if you're like me, I don't trust them being able to cut a straight line, especially when they're excited to get going. If you know a really good librarian and you're friends with them, maybe you can have them help you cut them out on their downtime. But do plan for some time around that. But really, that's the only downside I can see to these tiles. Big fan. I own all of the sets that are currently there and looking forward to the new ones coming out. They just announced a brand new Kickstarter campaign for 2 new sets. The first one's called Castles and Keeps. So it's kind of an expansion of that town idea. You're going to get a bunch of new tiles to build different fortresses and castles. That comes in handy with a lot of the campaigns and can also be kind of paired in with some of the dungeon tiles. And then the other one is called Cursed Lands and is specifically designed to go with the Curse of Strahd. So look for those. I'll put a link to the Kickstarter down below as well, and you'll definitely want to look at picking those up too. Appreciate you guys watching today. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like it and also subscribe so that you can see more of our videos as I began going through a series on the Dungeon Craft tiles and how to build some of the maps for the Dungeons & Dragons campaigns using the Dungeon Craft series. If you've got any comments on other products that you'd like to see me check out or recommendations for different ways that we can use these tiles, go ahead and leave those in the comments below, and we'll see you soon for another video here on the RPG Club.